Now, when I talk about designing with LibreOffice, I mean it in a much broader sense than most people mean. A lot of people hear design, and the first thing they think of is something like the equivalent of a HTML blink tag that screams attention to itself. I don't mean that. Two things on that. First of all, I use a comparison to the Chinese classical gardens, the Feng Shui design, where the whole point is that everything in the garden is calculated precisely to the extent that in the imperial Chinese gardens, they even had places marked where a vase would sit on an exact position the vase would sit on a table, but it looked all very natural. And that's the same thing as design. Design should not be calling attention to itself. It should be working behind the scenes, enhancing the reading without really most people being aware of it. And also, design does not just mean how it looks. When you deal with a document, you also want to think of design in terms of how do you maintain and revise this document if it's going to be in use for several years. You know, what can make your life easier when you have to come to edit it, or you need to put up a similar copy with only a few pages difference. So all that is really what I mean by design. Fonts are, so there are certain things that are similar to all fonts, of course, but in the book, I do try to emphasize the movement towards free fonts, which has just gone crazy in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, there were only a few free licensed fonts, and most of those were crap. And now there's probably about 600 or 700 fonts, some of which are copies of famous proprietary fonts, but there's an awful lot increasingly that are original designs. So it's quite possible now to do a lot of work in design with free licensed fonts, which has a lot of advantages, especially if you're going to share your document with somebody. You know, it's easy for them just to download what they need. And again, mostly when I'm thinking about fonts, I'm not really thinking of the fancy decorative ones or the ones that look like medieval monsters or Halloween ghosts or something. I'm thinking sort of the everyday workday fonts that you would use, you know, in writing a letter, writing a book. And that's really what I'm focusing on. Those can be unglamorous, but on the other hand, to get a really good one that actually will make reading a book a pleasant experience, an easy experience, takes a little bit of selection. General rule is if you're going to write for online publication, you use a sans serif font, the fonts that don't have the little hooks at the end of the letters, because those hooks, the serifs, they tend to get lost online, especially if you're in a low resolution. That's one of the more obvious ones. I've got, of course, have my own favorite fonts. The book is published in two fonts that are put out by a little organization called the League of Movable Type. And one of those is Fanwood, which I use for the body of the text. And the other I use is Railway, which is used for the headings and footers and things like that. And those are actually two of the best free fonts that I've come across, which is one of the reasons why I use them. Traditionally, you use one font for the body and one for headings and subheads and things like that. That's in print, of course. We're still discovering some of the rules for online, even after 20 years. Or maybe I should say customs, because it's not really a rule. What are the rules that have been, customs that have been developed over 500 years of having the printing press? Like, what size margins do you use? Those are ones that are usually good to follow, unless you've got a really good reason to break them. Others are just the fashion of the times. Like about 10 years ago, having gone away from the typewriter, everybody went for what they call distressed fonts, which looks like they were typed on a typewriter whose keys needed cleaning. And that was just the fashion of the times. And that's come and gone. There's nothing really that stands out right now as being the fashionable. But I always say that most people, unless they want to be really avant-garde, they want to get something that's good and reliable, something that's stood the test of time. And that's one reason, for instance, the body fonts that we tend to use tend to be designed about 80 to 120 years ago, because they're, by and large, they're fonts that have good workhorse fonts that you do a lot with, and they're flexible and they look generally good, and you can't go too far wrong with those. I would much prefer to have something maximized for online, because I think that's where most of the people are going to read it. But on the other hand, we're dealing with Lulu.com for the hard copies, and they have a pretty strict set of standards, so we don't really want to keep juggling them back and forth, because that's where mistakes creep in. And it's hard enough just to get the typos out, let alone causing troubles by having 2 or 3 versions you're trying to keep up. I didn't write it primarily for money, though I certainly wouldn't object if it brought in a steady income. I did, partly I was curious to answer that question that you just asked. When you offer something with a free license, how many people will actually buy the book? I would say that it's probably maybe about 80 or 90 downloads to one sale. But on the other hand, I've got to say the whole thing is pretty, just about put me in a bit of a daze, because when I put this book out, I thought, well, we may get maybe about 1,000 downloads over a couple of years. And we hit 1,000 downloads the first afternoon. So far, I've got just under 15,000 downloads. And there's a German Linux magazine that's going to put the book in with the CD that goes with the magazine in a couple of months. So roughly looking at about 23,000 distributed throughout. And I never expect anything like that. Yeah, French and Spanish. We've got some nibbles for German, Italian, and Chinese as well. Right now, I'm in the middle of I'm taking. A lot of people look at the 500 pages of the book and they think that's an awful lot to take on. So we're also going to be publishing, both in downloads and in hard copy, excerpts from the book on specific subjects in smaller volumes, of course, at a lesser price, and see what happens with that. Okay, selling for just over $29 on Lulu.com.